The other day I was participating in a chat on the internet forum, and somebody called the view that I was expressing denialism. In fact, they called me a denialist. And I know that's there because if you Google a lot of the topics I talk about on this channel, you'll also find words like denialism, denialist. But what's called a denialist is just somebody who's looking for another perspective, who wants their ideas evaluated on their own terms. And when I think of people who are specialists, they say, well, I'm a specialist in this or I'm a specialist in that. Being so specialized is not always a good thing, because then you're not able to cover as much material in this interdisciplinary a way that would let you evaluate the thing that you're an expert on. And a good example was actually given by the Brazilian doctor Alan Borges. And he said, if you're a specialist in blue, and you know everything about blue, and you can tell us all about the frequencies of blue, and all the effects that blue has, and you know everything about blue, you're a specialist about blue, then if you're put in front of a rainbow, you're going to need to use language and concepts that encompasses more than just blue. And we need to be open to reevaluate our ideas and to consider if they're wrong, because I'm not denying anything, but if there's a bigger picture. And I don't know how many times I've heard this expressed, that look how fast technology is progressing. It took us this long to get to the wheel, and then it took us this long to get to the computer, and then from the computer to smartphones it took us this long. And so technology is increasing and developing exponentially. And we also have this idea that humanity is evolving. We're constantly getting more developed. But I'm not so sure that we're evolving. And rapid technological development is not necessarily a good thing, because when you go really fast, you can also overlook things and overlook parallel lines of endeavor that haven't even been considered, but that have massive implications for where you're going. And I think I just look at like the way electricity developed, this dirty technology, having to string everything by wires. And even over 100 years ago, Nikola Tesla talked about pulling energy out of the vacuum and having enough free energy to power the earth. So rapid technological change and development is not only a good thing, because you can overlook, you're so used to going fast, you can overlook developments that need to be incorporated into what you're doing and where you're going. I think of over 40 years ago now, when Dr. Reichhammer in Germany discovered the 5 biological laws. And that it doesn't mean that medicine as we know it is wrong. We're not denying it, but we're saying that it's incomplete. And now with German New Medicine, you can see the logic in Mother Nature and the cosmological integration of biological processes. So through a new understanding of neuroscience based on the 5 biological laws, we need to pull on the brakes and say, okay, hey, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe we need to reevaluate something here. And I think that's the problem with specialists. A lot of them, I don't think they even know what they're talking about, because I would have doctors and tell me, even medical teachers at university, that they knew that COVID-19 was real because they saw the symptomology of the persons, the symptoms that they were having. But they don't even know how scientists prove that viruses exist, doing these experiments in the test tube. And I think the officialdom should be more honest with the public about just what they mean when they say they're isolating a virus, or where they get the genetic measurement from. Seems like they're always pushing the envelope on exaggerating and extending the meanings, because Now when they talk about virus isolation, they're not even talking about the phony test tube experiments. They're talking about when they take the sample from the person, but you don't know what you're dealing with because it's never been compared against a gold standard. So you start with a myth, and then the myth just snowballs and gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until people can't even realize that they're operating within a phony system. So I don't consider myself a denialist, and I think if people would really look at the evidence about AIDS and what it means politically in terms of having this recycled over and over again, this pattern of an epidemic of a new test along with a toxic treatment, I think they would see that they've been sold a bill of goods and they had the wool pulled over their eyes, and all to take us to a very dark place. And I feel like a lot of the times the alternative health community, and I include Robert Kennedy Jr. in this, they're too quick to buy the Kool-Aid, too quick to operate within the virus paradigm. So even though I'm called an AIDS denier, if you look at the kind of research I do, you do a preliminary search on chatbot or ChatGPT or even Google, they'll say that I'm an AIDS denialist. And I'll tell you an interesting story. Over 10 years now, I presented my AIDS research to a priest that I know, and he looked at it and he said, yeah, it looks a little interesting, but then he wrote back and said, we're really not qualified to look at this because there's so many experts and they've determined that this is the case, so who are we? And he said it's too easy for uneducated people to have bolstered self-confidence. Well, I agree with that. It's true that uneducated people can become too sure of themselves without having all the facts. The problem is when you're a specialist in something, and maybe for monetary and career investment, maybe out of fear that you're not doing the right thing, you don't have the time or the energy or the will or the inclination to look at anything that would contradict what you're doing. And frankly, in today's marketplace of ideas, that's hard to do because there's so many things. I feel very fortunate that I've been able to cover so many areas. But there's another way of interpreting this. When you're a specialist in something, you don't have the inclination or the time to sort through till you would come to other ideas. But it's interesting, this priest, 10 years later during the COVID-19 circus fiasco, they closed his church. He said he couldn't give church services anymore. So then he got angry and he went to study, do viruses exist? And he started reading and then posting on Instagram a lot of those sources that I had approached him with 10 years ago. And he said, I'm changing my opinion. What changed for him was he looked at the evidence. And I think it's interesting how the layperson and even the journalist, they toss around words and concepts like evidence and proof without really stopping and knowing what these mean. And there's a very good legal channel on YouTube. I published it earlier today where this guy's talking about the difference between circumstantial evidence and direct evidence. It says that judges, when they're hearing a case, they want to piece the puzzle together, and to do that, circumstantial evidence is actually considered very good evidence. So a lot of times people can have knee-jerk reactions, but it shows they really don't know what they're talking about. And remember what I was saying about how when we go fast, we run the risk of getting on the wrong track because we haven't looked at all the information. How fast did the HIV AIDS viral hypothesis, how fast did that develop in the 80s? It developed so fast and there was so much money behind it that then by the time Dr. Duesberg arrived on the scene, the damage was already done and it was easy to just censor him and freeze him out. So I'm from a school of journalism. I guess sometimes they call it gonzo journalism, where you get in people's faces, so to speak, if not literally. You make yourself part of the journalism. You make it so that you're in the middle on a personal level. And that in some way it forces people to look at this. And then they see it and they think, oh yeah, there is something going on here. But I'm just one person. So I depend on others sharing the videos, linking to the things, and making their own contribution. And hopefully, like the blind man and the elephant, together we can get the pieces of the puzzle together and we can create a better future for ourselves.